I mean, now I don't know if I'd look back at it with different eyes, but as far as what do I think may have influenced Blade?
Well, I'm just saying, the dislike of critics, because do you think they were just tired of subpar superhero films? Do you think that they watched Batman and Robin, Steel, Barbed Wire, Tank Girl, Judge Dredd, and they were just beaten over the head with these weird or over-the-top superhero films, and they just were tired of it, and that played into some fatigue with Blade, as far as critics not liking it, because this is 100 times more fresh than those films were.
And it doesn't feel like a superhero movie. I think that's what an advantage that it had. I think it was a thing where they're like, okay, it's a vampire movie. Then you see the Marvel logo and you go, I had no idea. As far as a casual fan walking in, honestly, I think they probably thought it was going to be just another vampire movie, not The Daywalker, not Wesley Snipes. I don't know. That's a tough question. And I didn't feel like any of those movies would have affected it at all. Yeah. Truly.
I guess I'm saying the negative critic score. So maybe critics were just beaten up. Like, they were just so used to beating on these types of films where they just went in ready to tear this one apart. And I don't know. I just wanted to kind of drop that on you. And also,
here's my question. Here's my question. Who are the winners during that time of 1998? What are the movies that were really moving and shaking and getting a lot of good fresh scores? Because that is probably a reason, and how different they are. Like if Forrest Gump was coming out around then, and then you have Blade, they're like, no, we like this one. So Blade is going to suffer because it's not really going with the Hollywood trend of what's out and what's popular.
That's a great question. I mean, so we had Armageddon, Saving Private Ryan, Godzilla, There's Something About Mary, and let's see, A Bug's Life, Deep Impact, Mulan, Dr. Dolittle, Shakespeare in Love, Lethal Weapon 4. Those were the highest grossing movies.
You look at those movies, every single one of them seemed to, except for like Something About Mary, seemed to be on a much bigger scale, and a lot of stars in those movies. Look at the cast of Armageddon. Seeing a lot of big names, and then you see two that aren't really that big. Wesley Snipes, Stephen Dorff. Nobody's really looking at that and going, wow, this is a star-studded movie. And then, some of those are kind of seated in reality-ish. Does that make sense? Like, not Bug's Life or anything like that, but like Armageddon.
Saving Private Ryan. I mean, even Godzilla, they toned it down to be more... Okay, it wasn't just Godzilla and another monster battling. They tried to make it more grounded, I would say, the latest Godzilla. But then they forgot about actually making Godzilla interesting.
That's a good point.
I guess Lethal Weapon 4, you had the great Jet Li fight. But it just, I don't know. I know we can't get into critics' heads. And, I mean, the 90s vampire movies were popular, and it just seemed... I mean, this movie was still a success. On a $45 million budget, it made $130 million. And it did kick off the superhero film big time. Because look at after this movie came out, right? So after it comes out, we get 2000 X-Men, 2000 Unbreakable, 2002 Spider-Man, 2002 Blade 2, Hulk, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Daredevil. Like, it just got, I don't know, like they got bigger and better. So I think Blade really did influence. And Marvel was in trouble in the 90s. They were not.
They were selling properties left and right. They couldn't make movies.
Yep. And then they had this hit. And I think, I'm telling you, this movie helped. I know The Crow was good. I love The Crow. Dark City wasn't that much of a success, but that wasn't a comic book movie. But I know we're getting lost here in it. But I think Blade, to me, is just so influential and so good that Marvel fans nowadays, they just don't. I mean, true, it's 98. It's like over 20 years old. Jeez Louise.
They don't appreciate the fact, because we talked about this on Alter Ego podcast. People hailed Chadwick Boseman as the first ever African-American superhero movie lead. Yeah. And we go back and forget that Blade was the first guy to do it. And do it really, really well. And then after that, you even mentioned Spawn. Spawn had done it too. Yeah. High White. But as far as the Marvel properties go, Wesley Snipes and Blade was the first one. And I think truly that Blade movie, that Blade 1, still holds up with almost any of the Marvel properties that are coming out right now in terms of tone and the way the character is. I just feel like he's very polarizing.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know. I love it. I love this movie. And I love this movie so much, I figured out how much blood came out of those sprinklers in the beginning and how those vampires were able to set that up.
How many gallons of it?
Yeah, 400. I guess that, let's see, where's my final math? So here's what I did. I analyzed the party. And in the film, there's two different sprinkler systems. So it looks like they installed a sprinkler system specifically for the blood.
Mm-hmm.
And then they have another one there that must be for a fire. So they built this blood rave area so that they could have blood raves with yuppie vampires, I think. I think these are yuppie vampires who are wasting animal blood because it's the packing plant where we saw.
That was going to be my next question.
Yeah.
How much of that do you think is animal blood and how much of that was human blood?
So, they had humans in the background. So I'm pretty sure they had to have done that. Had some human blood, but then they're not really drinking it, right? They're just sort of letting it wash over them.
Yeah.
Like, you and I we're hungry guys. If we're at a party and they're just dropping delicious IPAs from the ceiling, I'm drinking it.
Yeah.
Right? If brownies are coming from the ceiling, I'm eating those things. But in this one, they're just kind of letting the blood wash on them. So that's why I think it might be animal blood. I don't know if you think about that. But I've come to the conclusion that somewhere between 425 gallons of blood poured out of them, which means they drained blood from either 41 cows or 283 adults. Or they collected 3,400 one-pint donations from the blood banks they have all over the world.
Now, that's interesting. That, I think, is probably the more plausible reason or for them to have that much blood. Because then they're also screening whatever they're draining and sending into the sprinklers.
Yeah, right? It's
Maybe that's why they're not drinking it, too, is because it's not coming straight from the victim. This it looks like it's watered down blood, and maybe it's more for appearance, although you do see a couple of the vampires with their mouths full and trying to drink it in that scene.
It's just, what I like about it is, in a lot of films, we get vampires who need the blood. They don't waste the blood. So, I mean, in the 90s, From Dusk Till Dawn, I think they definitely wasted some blood. But normally these vampires, they kind of live in the shadows, and they aren't just sending blood flying everywhere. They sort of need it. So I just love this visual of these new partying young in quotation marks,
right?
Wasting blood, because that's not something Udo Kier would do. That's not something the main vampires would do.
The Lestats of the world, yeah.
Lestat's not doing a blood. That'd be awesome. Tom Cruise is just dancing like in Tropic Thunder with blood all over him.
Or because in Anne Rice, I'm pretty sure Lestat was a rock star.
Yep.
And his whole vibe was the fact that he was out at night and he was a vampire, air quotes, even though he really was one.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right. You don't see that. And they also touch on that when he goes to speak to the ancient pure blood vampires. They're like, our ability to survive has been based on our ability to blend in. So why are you doing this? They kind of look at Frost like, what are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
You're wasting all this blood. You're openly attacking people in these clubs. You're not really they basically accuse him of not being a vampire. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's really interesting too, where they're old. They're what? They were born vampires, I suppose. They're pure bloods. I don't know how that works, but it's that brings up whole new things about their anatomy, and also the fact that some vampires turn into zombies and eat anything, or maybe even vampires. There's a world that they just drop, dude. That's right. Awesome.
That doctor, they said, something went wrong when he was turning.
Yeah.
So he doesn't die, but he doesn't live, and he doesn't turn into a vampire, so he's kind of a zombie. They even say the word zombie.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, wow.
There's a lot of lore, vampire lore here. I mean, they go out and they put sunblock on. There's bullet time actually in this movie, somewhat bullet time. They don't have the multiple cameras surrounding the person, but Stephen Dorff in '98 dodged bullets a year before Matrix was dodging bullets. Now, I know they were in Australia making the movie, but I don't know. There's so much about this movie, and I guess
it goes against vampire lore as well in this movie. Things like you just brought up, like in a lot of other movies and vampire lore, the older the vampire, the more powerful they are.
Yeah, you're right.
In this one, these purebred that have been alive for thousands and thousands of years are scared of Deacon Frost, who's a bit vampire who just turns. When you look at vampire lore, you're like, wait a minute, they're not supposed to be afraid of him.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. And
Yeah.
another too, he smokes in the movie several times. And in almost every other vampire movie, if they ingest anything other than blood, they become violently sick or possibly even die.
Yeah, they pull What We Do in the Shadows, right?
Yeah. I mean, he's drinking What We Do in the Shadows. They drink the blood and they don't understand that he go get sick.
Oh, that's perfect. Holy mackerel.
I love Nandor.
Have you watched the movie?
Oh shit! Sorry. I don't know if I can cuss.
That's fine. Have you watched the movie?
No, I want. So Robert Lamb, who's a mutual friend of ours who does Seven Lamb Productions, I've been begging him to watch the show, and he won't watch the show until he watches the movie. So he just watched the movie. Now he got to watch the show, so I need to watch the movie to get caught up now. But that's neither here nor there. But when he goes, it's back to what I was saying about the kind of I don't want to say inconsistencies because it's their own world. They build it the way they want. I'm in.
Can I interrupt you real quick about something? Just one quick annoyance. You know what annoys me about vampire lore? They're fictional. Now they are based on. I did a Count Chocula video about if Count Chocula is related to the Habsburgs and related to Dracula. So I studied vampire lore, and it's just people digging up bodies in cold areas, assuming they're vampires. Just lore, right? To keep people afraid or lack of information. So, like you said, I hate when people are like, that's not what vampires do. I hate sparkly vampires. Vampires have no rules. Sorry, that was my rant. They're fictional.
Right. Yeah.
Make up whatever you want.
And I agree. I'm just saying that Blade definitely, and it speaks to what you were saying, their own lore is what they created, because when they're in that little, I don't know, the club where the girls are rapping, where they eventually find Pearl, all those vampires are watching Blade like, what is this guy doing here? But if you look, they're all drinking beer.
Yep.
Smoking.
Yeah.
And there's a club in the back. I'm like, in this world, are vampires able to still eat and drink?
I think they are, because remember when she's talking to Deacon later on, saying that you're a half-breed, where you can be turned back. You just have a genetic flaw in you. So there's this weird thing where they're maybe not undead, because they can still regenerate. So if you are a vampire and you can regenerate, that means your insides are not dead. They're just mutated. So maybe they can eat a blood burger or a blood pop. Or smoke a cigarette.
Yeah.
A bong and a blintz. A pipe and a crepe.
And another question is it the same rules where if you bite somebody who is drunk or high, you assume the effects of the chemistry in their blood, and you in turn become drunk or high from doing it?
I would say so. I was in a band called the Brewskis, and we opened up for this guy called the Unknown Hinson. That his whole bit was that he was a vampire. And we wrote a song specifically called "A Vampire Drank My Blood and She Got Drunk." Because we were the Brewskis, and that was our song. So I think so, man. If you're drinking if someone's been shooting tequila all night and you drink their blood, you're going to get a rush.
Yeah. It makes all the sense in the world, to be honest with you.
But that's what I love about this world, though. And you know what's funny? I never picked up on the cigarette smoking. But they don't mention it. Udo Kier doesn't run into the room and go, "Deacon, what are you doing? We can't do that." There's no. And then he puffs on the cigarette, and then Udo pukes because he's a pure blood. But it's but that's really funny. They really are quite fast and loose, but it still feels more grounded, right? It's interesting.
You also mentioned him being able to stay outside.
Yeah.
In the sun. That was another one that I was like, this is a little iffy here. If all vampires knew that all they had to do was put on some SPF 8000 and they could go outside for a few minutes, why aren't more of them doing it? Not to mention, how does he put sunblock on his eyeballs? Because those are still out in the sun.
It's a great question. Maybe he was in the shade. He wasn't in the shade. If I was Blade, I would track massive sunblock sales.
There you go.
Well, only 8,000. Like, I wouldn't be worried about 45. I would be worried about, man, that vampire, those people just ordered a case of SPF 12 million.
Right.
I need to go hunt them down.
Right. Or he's tracking the sale of the chemicals used to make it.
Oh.
Really powerful sunblock.
Yeah. But you know what, though? Like you said, it's just fictional again. And maybe these half-breeds are more... maybe sunlight doesn't affect them as much. I love how we're going like half breeds, full breeds, because they have some maybe human blood still in them or human genetics still in them because they aren't really dead.
Yeah.
Because I have a question. You're a dead vampire. You can't grow your arm